Hey guys, this is Being K with Kelechi. Welcome to those of you who are new and returning. Thank you for joining me. Today I just wanted to share on a topic that I wanted to share on for a very long time, but I kind of forgot. Sorry. And I feel like I woke up this morning and the Holy Spirit was like, listen, sis, what are you doing? What are you doing? So here I am. The topic will be coming from the story of Adam and Eve. And it's one of those things where we tend to fixate on how they ate the apple or ate the fruit, whatever fruit it was. And how we see those memes on social media and we're like, why would they eat the apple? They ate the apple and now everything's hard for us and yada yada yada. And we forget that the premise of that story wasn't about an apple. It was about their disobedience. It was about how they wanted autonomy from God and they wanted to operate independently of God. And this is a heart posture that kind of threads its way even up till now. It's something that we all struggle with as well, where we want to do our own thing. We want to live our own life without any input from God. And so we're often presented with these fruits that God says to us, don't touch. But we go ahead and touch them anyway because they look good or they promise something temporarily that we cannot resist, and ultimately see ourselves going down a path that we don't want to. So if you are interested, please go ahead and stay tuned, and I'll see you guys in a bit. So, with this story of Adam and Eve, I'm going to be looking at this whole idea that one of our greatest struggle and our greatest temptation as human beings is the need to be autonomous, to operate outside of God, and to do our own things without having His input, right? And finding ourselves sucked into the space where the enemy, the serpent, can lie to us and present something that might appear good, but ultimately will bring about all of these consequences, and we wouldn't even see it coming because he conveniently forgets to mention these consequences. So I'm going to be reading out of Genesis 3. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I'm going to pick out the verses that are relevant to the topic at hand. But I will encourage you guys to go ahead and read the entire thing, just to have an idea of, the entire storyline. So from chapter 1, it says, "The serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord had made. One day he asked the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden?' 'Of course we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden,' the woman replied. 'It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we're not allowed to eat. God said you must not eat it or even touch it. If you do, you will die.'" And how many things, does God tell us, don't go there, don't touch that, don't do that, right? And he has said to us, this area is an area that ultimately leads to death. And we think of death and we think of what we lose our lives. But death is not only that. Death is loss of our vision, loss of our character, loss of peace, loss of maybe friendships, loss of relationships, loss of whatever it is. Death is loss. It's something that was living, now not being, And here comes the serpent saying, nah, you won't die. You won't die. And again, that's the whole premise of what he does even now. He says to us, no, that's not true. Nothing is going to happen if you touch that thing, if you eat that thing, if you go into that thing, if you meddle with that thing, if you go and if you dishonor God in this way, if you disobey God's instruction in this way, nothing is going to happen. People are exaggerating. Nothing is going to happen, right? He doesn't change his tactic. It might be dressed in something different, but his tactic remains the same, and it's always full of lies. Anyway, he says, you won't die. The serpent replied to the woman, God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. He knew exactly where to tempt them at, because he understood that inherent in men is that thing, right? Is that thing that we want to do. We want to have access to all the knowledge, have access to all of the things, so that we can go and make our own decisions without consulting with God. You will be like God, knowing both good and evil. The woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. And at that moment, their eyes were open, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. And I won't read further than that part. But here we are. We see that, she's been presented with access to all of the things that she wanted. This thing looked so delicious to her. It looked so good at first. And the way, whenever the enemy comes, he packages it so well. He packages disobedience so well, because temporarily it looks like it will give us access to the things that we want. It looks like it will feel so good. It looks like this is the thing that we have always wanted, right? It just seems like the best thing ever. He conveniently forgets to tell us what the consequences will be when that happens. And in this case, some of the consequences that I saw, right, was one, there was a separation from God, because now they felt shame. They were now made vulnerable in their nakedness. They had now found themselves in a very vulnerable space. And so shame came upon them. And because of their shame, they hid from God. There was now a separation from God, a separation from the presence of God. And the presence of God is where we receive everything that we need, right? So that was already number one thing, a separation from God. Then number two, we find that they move from this place of rest, this place of thriving, this place of being sustained by God in the garden. Now they're moved away from that point to a place where they now have to sustain themselves. They now become their own sources. They now have to toil and strive to take care of themselves. And that is, let's see, what's the verse? Since you listened to your wife and you ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. So the Lord banished them from the Garden of Eden, and he sent Adam out to cultivate the ground from which he had been made. So now, where they had been taken care of before, where the Lord was sustaining them, where they were in a place of rest in the garden, right? Now they're out of this space of rest. Now they have to toil. Now they have to strive, and they find themselves in this place of restlessness. That's another consequence that comes from paying attention to the lies of the enemy when he says, no, go ahead and indulge this thing that the Lord has said don't touch. And then the third consequence that I saw was that not only are they affected, because disobedience doesn't just affect you singularly, it also then stretches to those around you. If it's not just your immediate environment, it's also your children, your children's children. We see the effects of their disobedience stretch out for generations to come, all the way to our time. It wasn't just them dealing with this choice that they made. We see that it went further than them, all the way to now. And that is the thing. Disobedience doesn't just stop with us. It goes further. It goes way further. And these are the things that the enemy doesn't say to us when he's presenting these things that he packages so nicely. Right? He doesn't tell us that, listen, this is what's going to happen after. These are the long-term effects of the choices that you're about to make now. Right? And so how does this now tie into us? Because we can very easily be like, well, like, what is the fruits? What would be these fruits that that we're being asked to turn away from? What does this look like, right? Well, I can tell you, it's in. I would say that a lot of these fruits can be found in Galatians 5. And Galatians 5 talks about, fruits of the spirit and fruits of the flesh. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on the fruits of the flesh, because these will be the fruits for us that God says, don't touch. Don't eat out of that. Don't go there. Stay away from that. Because if you don't, it will lead to death. It will lead to death. And these are the same fruits that the enemy brings, dangles in front of us and says, nah, you're not going to die. And these things in the moment of a lot of these fruits feel good, right? They feel good. They indulging in them momentarily like satisfies us, but not for long. Not for long. It always comes with even more trouble than they were worth, right? So some versions call these fruits fruits of the flesh, but I'm reading out of the Passion's translation, and it calls them the cravings of the self-life. And these fruits include sexual immorality, lustful thoughts, pornography, chasing after things instead of God, manipulating others, hatred of those who get in your way, senseless arguments, resentment when others are favored, temper tantrums, angry quarrels, only thinking of yourself, being in love with your own opinions, being envious of the blessings of others, murder, uncontrolled addictions, wild parties, and all other similar behavior. And it says, haven't I already warned you that those who use their freedom for these things will not inherit the kingdom realm of God? And that for me is the ultimate death, to be excluded from partaking of God's kingdom, to not have access to God. For me, that is ultimate death, right? And that goes in line with what God always says when we indulge in these things, when we're touching things that we're not supposed to touch. We find ourselves, we find it leading us to death. And we know that the wages of sin will always be death. But the enemy doesn't always tell us these things, right? When he's bringing these temptations, he doesn't always tell us these things. And just like we see those same consequences that Adam and Eve had to deal with, these are the same kind of consequences that we will have to deal with when we indulge in fruits that we're not supposed to indulge in, right? Because the first thing is, then shame comes upon us, right? And not because God wants us to stay away from him, but because we feel like, we've done these things, well then I can't come before God. So we find ourselves running away from his presence, the same presence that we need to be running to, because he says to us that when we find ourselves in these moments of weaknesses, that we need to be able to come to his throne of grace with boldness, coming to ask for what we need. But then when shame comes, it clouds us, and then it causes us to run away from him, and then we're now separated from our Father, separated from where we're supposed to get the help that we need. Isn't that crazy? And then when we indulge in these things, although temporarily they might satisfy whatever itch that we may have, yeah, it ultimately puts us in a state of restlessness, in a lack of peace. That we find that there's such a distress in our souls. We find that we're just not at peace. I don't know how else to describe it. We're just not at peace. So while our flesh is being satisfied, these things cannot satisfy us long term. So then we're constantly hustling, we're constantly restless, we're constantly trying to find something else to fill that space that cannot be filled by any of these things. And then the last one is that then we have to deal with consequences that not only affect us, but affect people around us, could affect people that we don't know, affect our children, affect our children's children, and it goes on and on and on, all because temporarily we wanted to scratch an itch. We wanted to satisfy our flesh. We wanted to touch something that God says don't touch. You know, we want to live our lives on our own terms without God's input, without listening to his instructions, independent of him. And that is a very dangerous place. That can be a very dangerous place to be. You know? And I just find, like, the instant gratification of it all it's not worth it in the long run. The instant gratification of getting what you want now is not worth the long-term cost that comes as a result. It really is never worth it. I found it's never worth it. It might be delicious in the moment. You might think that you're having access in the moment, but what it does to our lives, it's never worth it. I'm pretty sure if Adam and Eve could look back at that moment and could see all that came after that moment, they would have thought twice about indulging in something that God told them, listen, you don't need to be touching that. You don't need to be going near that thing. So what is my goal today? I pray that everything that I've said brings conviction, not for the sake of condemnation, but for the sake of freedom, so that we can look at the places that we're struggling with, because God is not asking for perfection. He is asking for yielded hearts. He's asking for people with hearts to obey him, right? People who will come to him with everything. So I'm praying that whatever the area that conviction comes to, that it empowers you to go boldly before your Father, go boldly before the throne of grace, and say to God, listen, this area, I'm struggling with this area. This thing, I'm struggling with this thing. This thing is dangling in front of my eye, and the way it's looking, I want to eat it. Lord, hi. But being able to go, he welcomes us, he gives us the access to be able to come. Being able to go to him, knowing that he does not condemn us, but he wants us to not walk towards death. He wants us to walk towards life, right? Come to him. He wants us to come to him, to come to receive the grace that we need for whatever areas of weaknesses that we're struggling with. That is what relationship with him looks like. That is what having him as a father looks like. It's not doing things perfectly, but being able to access the one that can help us walk out in obedience, so that we don't find ourselves in unnecessary wahala that we don't need to be in. Yeah? So I pray that helped someone, and I hope to see you all again next time.